Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the HSS Vengeance and looked out at the burning remains of the Zephyrian homeworld. The orange flames danced across the planet's surface like angry spirits seeking revenge. 3 months had passed since humanity won the war against the Hive Collective, but the victory felt hollow and bitter in his mouth. 15 years of fighting had nearly destroyed everything humans had built among the stars. Entire colonies were gone, wiped out by the insect-like creatures that wanted to consume every living thing in the galaxy. Billions of people had died defending their homes, their families, their very right to exist. Now the war was over, but Jake could not shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Commander Lisa Parker walked up behind him, holding a data pad in her trembling hands. Her face was pale and her eyes were wide with shock. She had been working in the intelligence division for the past week, going through captured Hive databases and looking for information about their enemies' strategies. What she had found would change everything. "Jake, you need to see this," Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The data we pulled from the Hive command ships. It's not what we expected." Jake turned around and took the data pad from her hands. The screen showed communication logs between the Hive and several other alien species. As he read through the messages, his blood grew cold and his hands began to shake with rage. The aliens they had trusted, the ones who had promised to help humanity fight the Hive, had been working with the enemy all along. The Altarian Republic had been sending detailed reports about human fleet movements to the Hive commanders. Every time humanity planned an attack, the Altarians made sure the Hive knew exactly where and when it would happen. Thousands of human ships had been destroyed because of these betrayals, and their crews never knew why they were walking into traps. The Nexus Trading Consortium had been even worse. They had sold advanced weapons to the Hive while pretending to help humanity. The same energy cannons that destroyed human colonies had been built in Nexus factories and shipped directly to Hive fleets. They had literally armed humanity's enemies while taking payment from human governments. Most shocking of all was the Ethereal Council, an ancient race that claimed to be wise and peaceful. They had possessed defensive technologies that could have protected human worlds from Hive attacks. These shields could have saved millions of lives, but the Ethereals had kept them secret. They watched as human children died in Hive raids while sitting on technology that could have stopped the slaughter. "How long have you known about this?" Jake asked, his voice hard as steel. "I found the first evidence yesterday," Lisa replied. "I've been checking and double-checking the data all night. There's no mistake, Jake, they all betrayed us. Every single one of our so-called allies was working to help the Hive destroy humanity." Jake felt something dark and cold settle in his chest. The war had already changed him, turned him from a peaceful merchant captain into a killer. But this betrayal was different. This was not about survival anymore. This was about justice. He called his most trusted team members to the bridge. Maria Santos arrived first, her tactical gear still strapped to her body from their last mission. She was small but deadly, with scars on her face that told the story of too many battles. Ryan Brooks came next, carrying his intelligence equipment and wearing the tired expression of someone who had seen too many secrets. Alex Turner was the last to arrive, his massive frame filling the doorway as he stepped onto the bridge. "What's the situation, Captain?" Maria asked, her hand instinctively moving to her weapon. Jake handed the datapad to Ryan, who was their best intelligence officer. As Ryan read through the information, his face grew darker and darker. Alex and Maria looked over his shoulder, and Jake watched their expressions change from confusion to disbelief to pure rage. "Those lying bastards," Alex growled, his deep voice rumbling through the bridge. "While we were bleeding and dying, they were helping the bugs kill us." "It gets worse," Lisa said, pulling up more data on the main screen. "The betrayal goes back decades. The Altarians have been planning this since before the war even started. They wanted both humanity and the Hive to destroy each other, so they could take over our territories." Ryan looked up from the datapad with cold eyes. "Captain, we need to do something about this. We can't let them get away with genocide." Jake nodded slowly. The old Jake Morrison, the one who believed in diplomacy and peaceful solutions, had died somewhere during the war. The man who stood on the bridge now was harder, colder, and much more dangerous. He had learned that sometimes the only language the universe understood was violence. "I'm putting together a special unit," Jake announced. "We're going to hunt down every species and every individual who betrayed humanity. It doesn't matter where they run or where they hide. We will find them, and we will make them pay for what they did." Maria smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Count me in, Captain. I've got a lot of anger that needs somewhere to go." "Me too," Alex said, cracking his knuckles. "Those aliens are going to learn what happens when you mess with humans." Ryan was already working on his computer, pulling up star charts and communication intercepts. "I'm tracking their current locations now. Most of them think they're safe because the war is over. They have no idea what's coming." Over the next few days, Jake assembled his team and began planning their first mission. They would operate in secret, without official government approval. The politicians would try to stop them, would talk about diplomacy and forgiveness, but Jake knew that some crimes were too great to forgive. Some betrayals demanded blood. The team worked day and night, gathering intelligence and preparing their equipment. They studied their targets, learned their weaknesses, and planned their attacks. Jake could see the change in his people as they worked. The war had made them all killers, but this mission was making them into something else. Something the galaxy had never seen before. Lisa brought him reports of other betrayer species trying to flee human space. They knew their crimes had been discovered, and they were running scared. Some were heading for the outer rim. Others were trying to disappear into unexplored sectors. It didn't matter. Jake and his team would follow them to the edge of the universe if necessary. As Jake stood on the bridge one last time before their first mission, he looked out at the stars and made a promise. The war against the Hive was over, but a new kind of war was just beginning. This time, humanity would not be the victim. This time, they would be the hunters, and their prey would learn to fear the darkness between the stars. The betrayers had made their choice when they decided to help destroy humanity. Now Jake Morrison and his team would show them the consequences of that choice. The galaxy was about to learn a very important lesson about what happened when you crossed the human race. 2 weeks after discovering the betrayal, Jake Morrison and his team were ready for their first mission. They had formed what they called the Hunter Corps, a secret organization that existed only in the shadows. The human government knew nothing about them, and Jake wanted to keep it that way. Politicians would only get in the way of what needed to be done. Their first target was the Altarian Republic, the species that had caused the most damage to humanity during the war. Every time human fleets had walked into Hive ambushes, it was because the Altarians had warned their enemies. Jake had studied the reports and calculated that Altarian betrayal was responsible for the deaths of at least 2 million human soldiers and civilians. The team traveled to Seraphim Prime, the capital world of the Altarian Republic. It was a beautiful planet covered in crystal spires that reached up toward the sky like frozen lightning. The buildings were made of some kind of living crystal that changed colors with the light, creating rainbow patterns that danced across the city. Under different circumstances, Jake might have admired the alien architecture. Now all he could think about was the blood on Altarian hands. Tony Chen was their infiltration specialist, a small man who could slip through security systems like a ghost. He had spent years learning how to think like aliens, how to move through their cities without being noticed. Tony led the team through the underground tunnels beneath Seraphim Prime, using stolen Altarian access codes to bypass their security sensors. Kelly Wright handled their communications, monitoring Altarian transmissions and looking for signs that their presence had been detected. She was young but brilliant, with an ability to break alien encryption that bordered on supernatural. Through her earpiece, she whispered updates to the team as they moved through the crystal corridors. "I'm picking up chatter from the Altarian leadership," Kelly reported. "They're talking about evacuation plans. It sounds like they're getting ready to run." Jake felt his jaw tighten with anger. The Altarians knew their crimes had been discovered, and they were trying to escape justice. He signaled for the team to move faster through the tunnels. They could not let these betrayers slip away into the darkness of space. Tony led them to a maintenance shaft that opened into the central government building. Through the crystal walls, they could see Altarian officials hurrying back and forth with data storage devices and personal belongings. The aliens looked like tall, thin humans with silver skin and large eyes that reflected light like mirrors. Right now, those eyes were filled with fear. Alex Turner set up his equipment in the shadows while Maria Santos took position to cover their escape route. Alex was their weapons and technology expert, a big man who could make any piece of alien tech do exactly what he wanted. His job was to plant tracking devices on any ships that tried to leave the planet. Ryan Brooks worked alongside Alex, using his intelligence-gathering skills to hack into Altarian computer systems. The aliens had better security than most species, But Ryan had been breaking into enemy networks since the early days of the Hive War. His fingers moved across the keyboard like a musician playing a deadly song. "I'm in their navigation systems," Ryan whispered. "They're not just running randomly. They have a destination planned. Something called the Exodus Coalition." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The betrayers were not acting alone. They had formed some kind of alliance, probably planning to work together to escape human justice. This mission was becoming bigger than he had expected. Kelly's voice crackled through their earpieces with urgent warning. "Multiple Altarian security teams are converging on our location." "I think they detected our intrusion." Jake made a quick decision. "Tony, get those tracking devices planted now. Everyone else prepare for combat. We're not leaving empty-handed." The crystal corridors suddenly filled with the sound of running feet and alien voices shouting commands. Altarian security forces poured into the area, carrying energy weapons that hummed with deadly power. They wore armor made of the same living crystal as their buildings, armor that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. Maria opened fire first, her human weapons cutting through Altarian armor like it was made of paper. The aliens had never faced human military technology in direct combat before, and they were not prepared for the sheer destructive power that humanity had developed during the war. Alex joined the firefight, his heavy weapons turning crystal walls into glittering dust. Tony sprinted through the chaos, slapping tracking devices onto every Altarian transport ship he could reach. The devices were tiny and nearly invisible, designed to broadcast their location across the galaxy for months. No matter where the Altarians ran, Jake would be able to find them. Ryan continued working at his computer terminal even as energy blasts exploded around him. He was downloading everything he could from the Altarian databases, looking for information about other betrayer species and their plans. The data he was stealing would be worth more than gold to the Hunter Corps. "Got it," Ryan shouted over the sound of weapons fire. "I've got their complete communication logs with the Hive and something else. They've been planning this betrayal for over a century. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. They've been working toward the destruction of humanity since before most of us were born." Jake felt his blood turn to ice in his veins. A century of planning meant the betrayal went deeper than anyone had imagined. The Altarians had not just taken advantage of the war. They had helped create the conditions that made the war possible in the first place. Kelly's voice cut through his thoughts. Multiple ships launching from the spaceport. "The leadership is running. Let them go," Jake said, surprising his team. Tony got the tracking devices on their ships. Now we can follow them wherever they try to hide. The team fought their way back through the crystal corridors, leaving a trail of destroyed Altarian security forces behind them. The aliens had expected humans to be tired and weak after the war. They had not expected the focused rage of people who knew they had been betrayed by those they trusted. As they reached their extraction point, Alex triggered the charges he had set throughout the government building. The crystal spires collapsed in a shower of rainbow light, sending a message that would echo across the galaxy. Humanity was no longer the victim. Now they were the hunters. Back on their ship, Jake studied the data Ryan had stolen from the Altarian computers. The betrayal was worse than he had imagined. The Exodus Coalition was real, and it included dozens of species that had pretended to be humanity's friends. They were all working together now, planning to escape to distant galaxies where human justice could never reach them. Jake looked at his team and saw his own determination reflected in their faces. The Altarians thought they could run and hide among the stars. They were about to learn that there was nowhere in the universe far enough to escape human vengeance. The hunt was just beginning, and Jake Morrison would not stop until every betrayer paid the price for their crimes. 6 months had passed since the raid on Seraphim Prime, and the hunt had grown beyond anything Jake Morrison had imagined. What started as a small team seeking justice had become a full military operation. Admiral Kate Sullivan now commanded the Hunter Corps, with Jake leading the strike teams that did the actual hunting. They had ships, weapons, and soldiers dedicated to one purpose: finding every species that had betrayed humanity. The tracking devices Tony had planted on the Altarian ships had led them on a chase across half the galaxy. The betrayers were not just running randomly through space. They had a destination, something they were racing toward with desperate speed. The intercepted communications Kelly had decoded spoke of something called the Genesis Gate, an ancient alien artifact that could transport entire fleets to other galaxies. Jake stood on the bridge of his new ship, the HSS Retribution, watching the stars streak past as they traveled through hyperspace. They were heading toward the galactic rim, the edge of known space where reality itself began to break down. It was dangerous territory where few species dared to venture, but the betrayers seemed willing to risk anything to escape human justice. Paul Rodriguez was their navigation officer, a steady man who could plot courses through the most dangerous regions of space. He had been working day and night to track the fleeing Exodus Coalition, using every trick he knew to follow their trail through the void between star systems. The math involved in tracking ships at these distances made Jake's head hurt, but Paul seemed to enjoy the challenge. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange on the long-range sensors," Paul reported. "The space ahead of us is different somehow. The laws of physics don't seem to work the same way out here." Jake nodded grimly. They were approaching the domain of the void touched, ancient beings that existed partially outside normal reality. Intelligence reports suggested the betrayers had allied with these creatures, trading human secrets for protection and passage to the Genesis gates. The thought of his enemies working with beings that could warp space and time filled Jake with cold rage. Grace Kim, their chief engineer, had been working around the clock to modify their ships for travel in the galactic void. She was young but brilliant, with an understanding of alien technology that impressed even the veteran engineers. Grace had installed new shielding systems and reality anchors that would hopefully keep their ships intact when they encountered the void touched. "The modifications are holding so far," Grace reported from the engine room, "but I can't guarantee how long they'll last if we get into a real fight out here. The void does things to matter and energy that shouldn't be possible." The first sign of their enemies came when Kelly detected strange energy signatures ahead of their fleet. The signals were unlike anything in human databases, shifting and changing in patterns that hurt to look at. Jake knew they were approaching something that would test every limit of human technology and courage. "All ships, battle stations," Jake commanded. "We're about to meet the void touched." The enemy appeared on their screens like nightmares made real. The void-touched ships were not built so much as grown organic curves that seemed to flow and shift as they moved through space. They moved in ways that violated the basic laws of physics, appearing in multiple places at once or passing through solid matter like it was empty air. Behind the void touched came the fleeing ships of the Exodus Coalition. Jake could see Altarian crystal vessels, Nexus merchant ships, and dozens of other species that had betrayed humanity during the war. They were all running together now, united in their fear of human vengeance. The battle that followed was unlike anything Jake had experienced during the Hive War. The void touched attacked with weapons that existed partially outside normal space, phasing in and out of reality to strike at human ships from impossible angles. Their energy beams passed through normal shields as if they were not there, while their projectiles could appear inside enemy hulls without warning. Alex Turner had prepared special weapons for this fight, human technology modified with captured alien science, to work in the strange environment of the void. His gravity cannons could tear holes in space itself, while his quantum torpedoes existed in multiple dimensions at once. It was dangerous technology that could destroy the user as easily as the enemy. But desperate times called for desperate measures. Maria Santos led boarding parties against enemy ships, fighting battles inside vessels where up and down had no meaning, and time moved at different speeds in different rooms. Her soldiers had trained for months to fight in environments where human instincts could not be trusted, where the walls might suddenly become the floor, or where minutes could pass like hours. Ryan Brooks worked frantically to decode void-touched communications, trying to understand their alien thought patterns and predict their next moves. The beings seemed to think in ways that human minds could barely comprehend, their strategies based on concepts that existed outside normal logic. The turning point came when Jake realized the void touched were not really trying to destroy the human fleet. They were stalling, buying time for the Exodus Coalition to reach the Genesis Gate. Once the betrayers passed through that portal, they would be beyond human reach forever. "All ships, concentrate fire on the Genesis Gate," Jake ordered. "Ignore the void touched. We stop the betrayers from escaping or we lose them forever." The human fleet turned their weapons toward the massive alien structure that hung in space like a metallic spiderweb. The Genesis Gate was enormous, big enough for 1,000 ships to pass through at once. It pulsed with energy that made space itself ripple and bend around it. Paul Rodriguez pushed their engines beyond safe limits, racing to reach the gate before the fleeing betrayers could activate it. The void touch pressed their attack, their reality-warping weapons tearing through human ships like paper. Grace's modifications held, but Jake could hear the strain in her voice as she fought to keep their systems working in the chaotic environment. The final assault was a desperate charge through a storm of impossible weapons and twisted space. Human ships exploded around them as the void touched unleashed their full power, but Jake's determination never wavered. He had come too far and lost too much to let the betrayers escape now. Alex's quantum torpedoes struck the Genesis gate just as the first Exodus Coalition ships began to pass through. The explosion that followed was visible across multiple dimensions, a blast of energy that shattered the portal and sent shockwaves through both normal space and the void beyond. Most of the betrayer ships were caught in the collapse of the gate, crushed by forces that existed outside human understanding, but some escaped through other passages, fleeing deeper into the void where even human determination might not be able to follow. As Jake watched the wreckage drift through the broken space around them, he realized this was only the beginning. Intelligence reports suggested there were 11 more Genesis gates hidden throughout the galaxy, and the remaining betrayers would be racing to reach them. The hunt would continue, and Jake would follow his enemies to the very edge of existence if necessary. The war against the Hive had been about survival, but this hunt was about something deeper. It was about showing the galaxy that humanity would never forget a betrayal, never forgive those who helped their enemies, and never stop pursuing justice no matter how far they had to travel or how many impossible odds they had to face. 2 years had passed since the battle at the first Genesis gate, and Jake Morrison barely recognized the man he had become. The constant hunting had changed him, changed all of them in ways that went deeper than physical scars. The Hunter Corps had grown into a massive organization, with hundreds of ships and thousands of soldiers, all dedicated to tracking down the remaining betrayer species across the galaxy. Dr. Nina Foster was their psychologist, brought in to help the hunters deal with the mental strain of their mission. She had written reports that Jake tried not to read, reports that said many of his people could never return to normal life. They had become addicted to the hunt, unable to think about anything except finding their enemies and making them pay for their crimes. Jake knew she was right because he could feel the same darkness growing inside himself. Sleep brought dreams of burning alien worlds and the screams of betrayers begging for mercy they would never receive. When he looked in the mirror, he saw eyes that had grown cold and hard, eyes that belonged to someone who had forgotten what peace felt like. The next target was the Nexus Trading Consortium, the species that had sold weapons to the Hive while pretending to help humanity. They had built a mobile space city called New Babylon, a massive structure that could travel between star systems and was protected by mercenary fleets from dozens of different species. It was the ultimate fortress designed to be impossible to find and harder to attack. But Jake had learned patience during his years of hunting. He had scattered tracking devices and spy networks across half the galaxy, watching and waiting for the Nexus leaders to make a mistake. When they finally did, when one of their supply ships led Jake's scouts back to New Babylon, he was ready with the largest human fleet assembled since the Hive War. Ben Clark was their communications officer, a nervous man who had the ability to intercept and decode transmissions across vast distances. He worked day and night monitoring enemy communications, looking for weaknesses in their defenses and clues about their plans. Ben had been with Jake since the beginning, and the years of constant stress had taken their toll on him too. "Captain, I'm picking up a transmission from the Ethereal Council," Ben reported, his hands shaking as he worked his equipment. "They're offering to surrender all the remaining betrayer species in exchange for mercy." Jake felt his blood turn cold at the mention of the Ethereals. They were the species that had possessed defensive technologies that could have saved millions of human lives, but had chosen to keep those technologies secret. While human children died in Hive attacks, the Ethereals had watched from their crystal towers and done nothing to help. "What do they want?" Jake asked, though he already suspected the answer. Ben's face was pale as he read the message. "They're offering to reveal the location of the primary Genesis gate, the one hidden in the galactic core. They say if we spare them, they'll help us capture all the remaining betrayers at once." The bridge fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. The primary Genesis gate was the prize they had been hunting for 2 years, the portal that could transport the entire Exodus coalition to safety in another galaxy. If they could destroy it, the betrayers would have nowhere left to run. But Jake also knew this was exactly the kind of trap the betrayers had been setting since the beginning. They would say anything, promise anything to save themselves from human justice. The question was whether Jake was willing to trust species that had already betrayed humanity once. Maria Santos had become his second-in-command during the long hunt, her tactical skills growing sharper with each battle. She studied the tactical display showing New Babylon's defenses, counting the enemy ships and calculating their chances of victory. The mobile city was protected by thousands of mercenary vessels, more firepower than some entire species possessed. "It's going to be a bloodbath," Maria said quietly. "Even if we win, we'll lose half our fleet taking that place." Alex Turner had spent months developing new weapons specifically for this battle. Human technology pushed beyond all safe limits and combined with captured alien science in ways that terrified even him. His latest creations could crack planets and boil atmospheres, weapons that crossed the line between military hardware and instruments of genocide. "The new plasma cannons are ready," Alex reported. "But Captain, some of these weapons are so powerful they could damage space itself. If we use them in a populated system, the effects could spread to innocent worlds." Jake stared at the tactical display and felt the weight of his choices pressing down on him. The old Jake Morrison, the man who had believed in mercy and proportional response, would have found another way. But that man had died somewhere during the years of hunting, killed by the constant exposure to betrayal and the need for absolute justice. The siege of New Babylon lasted for 3 weeks and became the most destructive space battle in galactic history. The mercenary defenders fought with the desperation of people who knew they would receive no mercy if they surrendered. Jake's fleet used weapons that turned entire ships into clouds of superheated gas, while the defenders responded with bombs that could tear holes in the fabric of space itself. Grace Kim worked frantically to keep their ships running as the battle raged around them. She had seen things during the hunt that no engineer should have to see, weapons that violated the basic laws of physics and technologies that seemed to come from nightmares. Each battle pushed human science further into territory that felt more like dark magic than engineering. Ryan Brooks coordinated intelligence during the siege, tracking enemy movements and looking for weaknesses in their defenses. He had become expert at reading alien thought patterns and predicting their strategies, but the constant exposure to betrayer communications had filled his mind with paranoia and suspicion that colored everything he saw. The final assault on New Babylon was like watching the end of the world. Jake's fleet surrounded the mobile city and poured fire into it from every direction, using weapons that had never been tested in real combat. The city's shields held for hours before finally collapsing under the relentless bombardment. When the defenses finally fell, Jake led the boarding parties into the city personally. He wanted to look the Nexus leaders in the eyes as they paid for their crimes. What he found inside New Babylon was worse than he had expected. Evidence that the betrayers had been planning humanity's destruction for centuries. Detailed files on human weaknesses and strategies for using the Hive War to wipe out his species completely. But it was Ben's final intercept that changed everything. As New Babylon burned around them, the communications officer decoded a message from the Ethereal Council that revealed the truth about the primary Genesis gate. It was not just a portal to another galaxy. It was a weapon that could destroy the galactic core itself, making vast regions of space uninhabitable. For millions of years, Jake stood in the wreckage of the Nexus Command Center and realized that his hunt had brought him to the edge of a choice that would define not just humanity's future, but the fate of every living thing in the galaxy. The betrayers were offering him the ultimate revenge, but the price might be higher than even his hardened heart could accept. The journey to the galactic core took 3 months, and every day brought Jake Morrison closer to a decision that would echo across the universe for millions of years. The primary Genesis gate waited in the heart of the galaxy, hidden within an artificial star system that the betrayers had built using technology older than most civilizations. It was their final refuge, the last place they could run before human justice caught up with them. Jake stood on the bridge of the HSS Retribution and watched the swirling colors of the galactic core grow larger on the main screen. The space around them was filled with strange energies and gravity fields that could crush entire planets. But his ships pushed forward with the same relentless determination that had carried them across the galaxy. After 2 years of hunting, nothing would stop them from reaching their final destination. Amy Parker had replaced Grace Kim as chief engineer after Grace was killed in the battle for New Babylon. Amy was older and more experienced, but she carried the same brilliant mind for alien technology that had made Grace so valuable. She had spent months developing weapons specifically designed to fight in the impossible environment near the galactic core, where the laws of physics bent and twisted under the influence of massive gravitational forces. "The new reality stabilizers are holding," Amy reported from the engine room. "But the closer we get to the core, the more unstable everything becomes. Space itself is fighting against us out here." The betrayer species had made their last stand in a fortress that defied human understanding. The artificial star system contained 12 planets, each one a massive weapons platform capable of destroying entire fleets. The stars themselves had been turned into weapons, their nuclear fires directed and controlled to create beams of pure destruction that could reach across solar systems. Roger Banks was their technical specialist, a quiet man who understood alien science better than most aliens did. He had been studying the Genesis Gate for months, using long-range sensors and captured data to understand how the massive portal worked. What he had discovered made Jake's blood run cold with both rage and fear. "Captain, the gate isn't just a portal," Roger said, his voice tight with worry. "It's connected directly to the galactic core. If we destroy it wrong, the explosion could trigger a chain reaction that would turn the core into a black hole. Half the galaxy would become uninhabitable." Jake stared at the tactical display showing the enemy defenses and felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on him. The betrayers had planned this final trap perfectly, positioning themselves where human justice could not reach them without risking the destruction of billions of innocent lives. They were betting that even after everything they had done, Jake would not be willing to sacrifice entire civilizations for revenge. The battle began when the human fleet entered the outer edge of the artificial star system. The betrayer weapons opened fire immediately, turning space into a storm of energy beams and gravity bombs that could tear ships apart at the molecular level. Jake's fleet responded with weapons that had been built for this moment. Reality-warping cannons and quantum torpedoes that existed in multiple dimensions at once. Maria Santos commanded the assault forces that would board the enemy platforms, leading soldiers who had been fighting this war for so long, they could barely remember what peace looked like. Her troops moved through battle zones where time flowed, backwards and where solid matter could suddenly become pure energy without warning. Alex Turner had outdone himself with the weapons he created for this final battle. His gravity cannons could create artificial black holes that lasted for seconds before collapsing, while his dimensional bombs could erase entire sections of space from existence. It was technology that scared even him, weapons that crossed every line between science and madness. The fighting raged for days as the human fleet pushed deeper into the star system, destroying one defensive platform after another. The betrayers fought with desperate fury, using weapons and tactics that violated every treaty and moral law in the galaxy. They turned planets into bombs and stars into weapons, showing that they would destroy everything, rather than face human justice. Ryan Brooks intercepted communications between the fleeing betrayer leaders as they retreated toward the Genesis Gate. The messages revealed their final plan. If they could not escape to another galaxy, they would activate the gate's weapon function and turn the galactic core into a weapon that could destroy human space entirely. It would be mutual destruction on a scale that had never been attempted in galactic history. Ben Clark was monitoring long-range communications when he detected something that changed everything. A message from Earth transmitted with the highest priority codes ordering Jake to stand down and return home immediately. The human government had learned about the hunt and the danger to the galactic core, and they were demanding that Jake stop his mission before it was too late. "Captain, it's a direct order from the President herself," Ben said, his voice shaking. "They're threatening to declare us enemies of humanity if we don't withdraw immediately." Jake read the message and felt something cold settle in his chest. The politicians back on Earth did not understand what was at stake here. They had not seen the evidence of centuries of betrayal, had not watched human worlds burn while their supposed allies helped the enemy. They thought this was about revenge, but Jake knew it was about justice and making sure the betrayers could never hurt anyone again. The final assault on the Genesis Gate took place in the heart of the artificial star system, where space itself had been turned into a weapon. The massive portal hung in the void like a metallic spiderweb, pulsing with energy that could transport entire fleets across the universe or turn the galactic core into a superweapon that could destroy civilizations. As Jake's ships approached the gate, the betrayer leaders sent him one final message. They offered to accept exile to the galactic void, promising to never return to inhabited space if humanity would spare the gate and allow them to escape. It was the same kind of bargain they had been offering since the hunt began, asking for mercy they had never shown to human victims. Jake stood on his bridge and looked at the faces of his crew, people who had followed him across the galaxy and through impossible battles because they believed in the mission. He thought about the billions of humans who had died because of betrayer treachery, about the children who would never grow up because aliens they trusted had sold them to their enemies. He thought about the politicians on Earth who wanted him to stop, who believed that some crimes could be forgiven for the greater good. He thought about the innocent species throughout the galaxy who would suffer if the core was damaged, people who had never harmed humanity and did not deserve to pay for the betrayer's crimes. In the end, Jake Morrison made his choice. He ordered his fleet to attack the Genesis Gate with everything they had, using weapons that could crack planets and boil stars. The explosion that followed was visible from one end of the galaxy to the other, a blast of light and energy that marked the end of the greatest hunt in galactic history. Whether that choice saved the galaxy or doomed it would be debated for generations to come. But one thing was certain: the universe had learned what happened when humanity was betrayed, and that lesson would never be forgotten.